U.S. women's national team defender, and I'm going to be your host today. And we've just heard the announcement that Australia and New Zealand will be hosting the Women's World Cup in 2023. And FIFPRO has brought together this wonderful group of amazing World Cup class players to discuss this breaking news and also talk about what their experience has been like playing in the Women's World Cup and representing their country. So first, a little bit about FIFPRO. FIFPRO is a global representative of professional footballers all over the world, and they work on behalf of professional footballers to amplify their voices, and they represent over 65,000 professional footballers all across the globe. They've brought some of these players here today, and I'm going to introduce them in just a minute, but I'm so excited to be a part of this because each of these players are involved with their respective players' associations. They're leaders within their sport, in their domestic environment. So they're not only athletes, they are activists, and I'm super excited to hear what they have to say. First of all, we have Elise Kellond-Knight, KK, from Australia. She's an Australian midfielder with 106 caps for her country, and she has played in 3 World Cups for the Matildas. We have Ali Riley of New Zealand. She grew up in Los Angeles, but thanks to her father, who is from New Zealand, she was eligible to represent the football Ferns and is now their captain. She has also appeared in 4 World Cups, is that right? I don't know, it's a lot. Yeah, I think it's 4. Erin McLeod, goalkeeper from Canada, representing the Canadian women's national team. Erin had her first cap in 2002, 18 years ago, 118 caps representing Canada in an incredible 4 World Cups as well. And last but certainly not least, we have Natalia Gaitán from Colombia. Amazingly, Natalia beat cancer when she was diagnosed at 5 to become the captain of the Colombian women's national team. She's played in 2 Women's World Cups and is on the front lines when it comes to fighting for gender equality in her country. So as I mentioned to you ladies just a few moments ago, this is a discussion. I have a bunch of questions for all of you, but feel free to jump in. I'd love for this to be as free-flowing as possible. And just thank you guys very much for being here. So KK, we're going to start with you. Just heard the news, Australia and New Zealand are host of the 2023 World Cup. What are your first initial thoughts and reactions after hearing this breaking news just a few hours ago?
It's immense. I don't think anyone quite believed it was going to happen, but it was like everything was just falling into place in the last couple of weeks. Condolences to Colombia and Natalia, of course. Don't want to gloat too much in front of you, but I think Ali can agree that, I mean, this is just going to be phenomenal. We haven't hosted a tournament such as this in the Southern Hemisphere, so it's going to be a world first, and everyone down under is really excited about it.
Ali, what are your initial thoughts once you heard the news and what's been going on in your circle of friends and folks?
Yeah, I was actually on the phone with Emily Van Egmond because we're teammates here in Orlando, and we were speaking of other things, but all of a sudden we thought we had maybe 10 minutes, and all of a sudden our group chat started going off. So we were just like, we're screaming, we're like, gotta go. And I just broke down, and just, I didn't think it would actually happen. And I think it very easily could have been, you know, the other way. And I definitely feel for Colombia, because I think we, especially as New Zealand, we're so desperate to have this tournament because we feel like we need this boost, and it can help so much with the development of the game in New Zealand. And I know Colombia was feeling the same way. So I think if we all put our heads together, and that's obviously what FIFPRO is all about, and what we as women and players and anyone who supports the women's game is all about, is making sure, yes, we're going to host it in New Zealand and Australia, but we're going to make this a tournament that really, really elevates our game and puts women's soccer, you know, on all the headlines and at the forefront of everyone's mind. So I'm so thrilled and just still very emotional about it. But I think we have a big task ahead of us, and I want to make sure that the Colombians and every other team that isn't hosting still feels that their voice will be heard in this tournament.
That's great. We'll come back to some of those things that need to happen. But first, I want to hear from Natalia. And again, I'm sure this is a tough day for you. I am sure you're a little bit heartbroken because Colombia did come so close. But what are your thoughts? What are your feelings as you only maybe a few hours later start to try to get it together and regroup after the disappointing news for your country?
Yeah, I mean, it was difficult, a little bit down, of course, because we had really getting to host the Women's World Cup. But I'm pretty sure Australia and New Zealand are going to do an amazing job. No doubts about it. You guys did everything in your power to do all these beautiful marketing campaign. I love it personally. I love it, and I just hope to be there to live the moment with you guys.
Erin, let's shift to you a little bit because Canada was the host of the World Cup in 2015, the last World Cup you played in. You were the starting goalkeeper. What do you remember about participating in the World Cup in Canada? What were some of the best memories that you had that you can look fondly upon?
Yeah, I mean, I think playing at home, I played in a lot of tournaments, but playing at home is unlike anything else. You know, every single game that we played as Canadians, we had over 50,000 people attending. And to see that many Canadian flags in front of the people who have watched you from, you know, playing at 4 years old to, you know, like my grandma, and, you know, just like having these people in the stands watching you, and who, because all the girls on the women on the call, like, you know, that you have people, the team behind the team that get you to that World Cup. And so for me, just every day being able to like celebrate and bring my nephew on the field with me after a game, and just having that experience, representing the people that you have the honor of representing without knowing and getting to know your whole life, but at the same time also seeing the people that you've represented your whole life, and so proudly.
Yeah. Allie, like, I see you glowing. You're like, oh man, that could be me. That could be me in a few years.
I
what
just,
does that make you think?
yeah, I mean, I remember the World Cup in Canada, and I'm good friends with a lot of the Canadians, and I think we played Canada, and I think even just to feel that as an opponent, to see that, like, is such an incredible feeling. And as New Zealand in the Olympics and the World Cup, we seem to always get the host nation. So I feel like finally that we can have this. But I think what Erin really said kind of about those supporters who don't necessarily know you and that you don't know, and like, they're going to feel like part of that World Cup with us and feel like family. And I'm going to get to meet, I mean, as you mentioned, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I don't spend that much time in New Zealand unless we're playing games, and we don't play that many home games. So this will be the chance of a lifetime to connect with these fans, these little girls who have sent me messages and followed us like for all of these years, to now finally get to meet them and engage with them and give them a show in New Zealand and Australia. But I mean, we barely play any home games. So this is so epic.
Yeah, I mean, New Zealand is far away from a lot of other countries, and I know
all of the other countries.
Yeah, it could be a challenge to get nations to come play you in New Zealand. So this is a huge opportunity. KK, I don't know if you can see, but behind me is a picture actually from the Sydney Olympics when I got to play for the US team. So this was my experience right here, getting to play in a major world event in Australia. What do you think this World Cup in 2023 can do for your country to help spring things forward for Australia and the women's game?
It's coming at the perfect time. I remember at the start of my career, playing for the national team on home soil was extremely rare. I mean, we're probably more fortunate than Allie, where we did get a handful of games at home, but it wouldn't necessarily be every year that you would be able to get a country to get out to Australia all that way to play against you. So we were used to playing in front of it, you know, a couple of 100 to 1,000 people. And then I look at the last couple of years where we're able to pull really decent crowds, have set new records just within the last year. And now we're going to be hosting some of the biggest countries and the best players in the world. Imagine what the growth is going to be just in the next 2 to 3 years. It's going to be immense. And it's unique in Australia because we've got so many codes of football that often the round football, the round game is, you know, 4th, 5th choice in terms of spectators. So for once, there's going to be a period of time where it's going to be the sport. Everyone's going to be tuned in, and Australians are sport mad as well. So you've got no doubt that everyone will be behind it. Everyone will be tuned in. And you would know from experiencing the Olympics that they can put on a decent tournament. So I'm excited for it. I can't wait to see what happens in 3 years' time.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Natalia, Ali talked about how, you know, it's not only the host nation's responsibility to put on a good show, but it's all of the federations doing their part to contribute to the women's game. So can you paint a picture for us of what the women's game looks like in Colombia and the strides that are being taken to help move the women's game forward in Colombia?
I mean, we had these big hopes to host the World Cup because we knew it was going to be a pressure, additional pressure, of course, for the federation, for the league, for the sports minister, for everyone to really be focused on women's soccer, not only about the stadiums, but also about the national team, the professional league, because we feel, I mean, we are trying to do everything in our reach to improve our game, but we really need the help from the government, from the sponsors, from the journalists, from everyone to achieve where we want to be. So right now we're just trying to get these little steps to go forward, but we kind of wish that the World Cup was going to bring all these really big industries, tourism, everyone to see the women's national team in our country. So yeah, right now we just have to focus, trying to prepare the best for the 2023 World Cup to demonstrate that we can be there and that the country should feel proud about the national team.
Will there still be progress, even though there's not this major world event? How do you get the government, how do you get the federation to continue to invest, to continue to care about the women's game now that you know that there's not going to be a World Cup in 2023?
I mean, the development is going to be there. Maybe it's not going to be as fast as we get the World Cup. But right now, we just hope that all the work behind the possibility to be the host will be put into the development of women's soccer. So right now we have everyone is reaching us, the players, to talk about it, to see what we think. And we have to take advantage of this moment that everyone is talking about women's soccer, to try to put this pressure, to call to the sponsors and everyone that is involved in this work, because we feel that we have the talent, we have all the energy, but that little support, that little mind changing is going to mean everything for us.
Yeah, it certainly does feel like we're at a pivotal time in the women's game. And I think the 2019 World Cup was a demonstration about just how much people are interested in the women's game and how much potential that we need to continue to live up to. So, Erin, my question for you is, what has been the legacy in Canada after the 2015 World Cup? Did you notice a difference, soccer or football, before 2015 and after 2015? What's been the legacy, if anything, in your country?
Well, I think definitely now, like, we have a lot of players that are household names. We also have a lot of like wonderful young players that were witnessing this World Cup in their backyard, and it had a big influence on their careers. And now we have a lot of like really young, wonderful players coming through the system. But I think, looking back, and what I hope as players we can do a better job in planning for future World Cups is thinking more about legacy and what that looks like. Because we still don't have a professional women's league in Canada, for example. And so going into a World Cup, you have to anticipate, especially now after France, like just how many people are watching. You have to expect success, and how can we plan to keep that success afterwards? And so I think one thing that I really, really value about the Australian team is they've been like world leaders, I think, with how they've dealt with their association. And I think it's so great that they're partnering with New Zealand, because I think although the men and women are considered equal now, I think there's still so many steps to be made in their program, and hopefully having this in their backyard. And I mean, the statistics show that if you have a professional league in your country, statistically, you're just more and more successful. I mean, you're just seeing this huge spike in these countries. And so I think hosting a World Cup is extremely important, but also planning for, okay, when this is done, what are we doing with these stadiums? Like, what are we going to do after the fact? So that it's not just kind of like a one and done. And Natalia, the one thing that I'll say, I know that it's discouraging right now, but I went to the 2011 bid with Canada and we lost to Germany. And the one thing that I really admired about losing is as a federation and our government, we went back and we learned a lot from their presentation. Germany won it, obviously, and we learned a lot about, what we could have done differently. And for Canada, it was really like this starting point and a chance for us to learn and grow and realize what was needed to host a World Cup. So I know it's hard now, but it's definitely like the first step. And now you're being considered. And that's what I was so grateful about that, because I don't think we would have got the 2015 bid if we lost, like we needed that to realize how much we had to grow and how many steps we had to make to move forward.
That's really insightful. KK, Erin mentioned having a league in their country, and Australia has what seems to me a pretty robust women's league that plays consistently. And we get it in the United States. I can watch those games at 3 o'clock in the morning when they're live. And there's some really quality soccer. Do you think the league helped contribute to your bid and helped contribute to the success in earning the Women's World Cup in 2023? And how do you feel like the league is contributing towards the game in Australia?
Yeah, definitely. Like Erin said, it's so vital to have a domestic league that is at the professional level. So I think it's invaluable. Our league isn't quite where we want it yet. It's a work in progress. It kind of sits in a little bit of a niche market where it's not even a full home and away series. And we're passionate that we want to turn that into a full home and away series. But if you've ever been to Australia, you understand how big the place is. And obviously, flying to and from every game has a massive expense. So it's an expensive league to run. So they have to work out how they're going to fund it long term. And then also it sits in this little pocket where you can play in America or Scandinavia and Australia. So that's how it works at the moment. But if we're going to move to a full home and away series, how is it going to look with players who are doing 2 seasons back to back? So it'll be interesting to see where it goes to. It's uncertain at the moment, but everyone has different opinions about it. But I think having a full home and away series professional league is vital. It's come a long way. It started in 2007, so I was a part of that inaugural season. Played about 8 years, and then I ventured overseas after that. So I think we've got to be thankful for our current squad who have come through all of that. We've all been products of our domestic league. None of us progressed and were trained overseas. We all came through that W League. So I think that's a pretty good insight.
Yeah, definitely. Ali, question for you. The New Zealand Federation, I would say, is we're one of the federations that were on the front lines when it came to equal pay between its men's and its women's teams back in 2018, May, I believe. And the Federation awarded equal pay between its men's and women's program, same pay, prize money share, rights for image use, travel budget. And I remember at the time being like, oh man, New Zealand's got it together. I'm impressed. my question to you, after 2 years now, we're in 2020, how have things been implemented? How has this mandate played out? Are things working? What's been your experience over the course of the past 2 years with regards to this topic?
I think it's an interesting one because that was definitely a pivotal moment for us. You know, we had Abby Erseg retiring on the grounds that we weren't getting enough support. You've seen a similar thing in Norway with Ada. So I think it was a really, really big decision. I think maybe less in practicality in terms of the fine details, because we already had very similar contracts, but that they became exactly the same and we became, you know, a unified front. That just the principle of doing that, I think, sets such a good example and is such an important statement to be made by the Federation for other sports, especially other women's sports and little girls around the country. And just, you know, that you notice that. And I mean, it made headlines all around the world. So I think that was the biggest thing. We do have equal standards, but I think we still want to be pushing those higher for both teams. So it's not like our men, we weren't a team where we were going from here to join the men. I think we're both together somewhat at the bottom. So, but I think having this unified front is then we know now moving forward that we were pushing for things together. And I think that's really important. Obviously, when you're looking at World Cup qualification, it is more beneficial for a federation that their men qualify because of the money involved and the attention involved. So now anything that the men benefit from, that will help us as well. That being said, now that we have this World Cup, I think maybe we can also do, like, why does it have to be that the men do something that then we get a benefit from it? Maybe we can push for ourselves and help the men, you know, and that would be a first probably. But I think while that was a great achievement and a milestone and something that I'm really, really proud of us for doing, like, the work doesn't stop there, because we're not, you know, we're not still getting so many things or, you know, flying business all the time. It's just that we have the same and we're just together kind of fighting for more. So I think it was an important step, and it's one that other federations that maybe don't have huge economic resources, it's still an important one to take. And then it's up to the players and with the help of FIFPRO and our unions to then push for more as a unified front. So I think this World Cup will be very, very important to continue that journey that we started. And I think it's important to be transparent about how those details haven't necessarily helped us in you know, practicality, but the principle is still very, very important and something that we're really proud of.
Yeah, the devil is in the details, and you know, the law and the announcement is great, but it's the execution of it that is equally, if not more important. So in talking about this 2023 World Cup and a little bit about equity, like, what do you need to compete at the highest level? This is the pinnacle event in our sport. So what should those conditions look like? What should those support and resources look like in 2023 so you guys can be at the pinnacle in this pinnacle event? This question is kind of for all of you, so anybody can feel free to jump in. Don't be shy.
Well, for me, something that I really noticed in 2019, which I thought was a huge difference, was kind of the attention, the media attention, and the from Nike with the kit launch, you know, flying players to Paris to be part of this huge fashion show, and things that I think maybe are very given on the men's side were so exciting and new for us on the women's side. And I think in 2022, wouldn't it be great if every sponsor and organization, and including FIFA, who's involved in running that tournament, every single thing they do for those men's players, they think, oh, how can we implement this next year for the women? Because you're already planning it, seeing how it works, what doesn't work. And why not have that same mindset for the women's tournament? And I think that also will help with the excitement for fans, revenue, buying jerseys, ticket sales, people tuning in on TVs, watching commercials, all of that. And I think these organizations have the money to do that for both the men and the women, but the mindset hasn't really been there. So I think that can be a huge call to action. Why wait until 2023 when we're going to host? Why not get in people's heads already for the men's World Cup? which is the year before. And then we just continue on that same path, and everything will be there to help do those exciting, amazing commercial opportunities with sponsors, media, all of that for the women, right after.
Yeah, like the Men's World Cup in 2022 could be the opener, and then 2023 could be the headliner, right?
Exactly. And we need to call it the Men's World Cup, because after is the Women's World Cup. It's not the World Cup and then the Women's World Cup. So very important.
I'm with you on that. Natalia, if Colombia is going to win the World Cup in 2023, what do you guys need?
Or do I sign that?
What do you guys need in order to do that? What's required for you to make that progress in the next 3 years so you guys can make those jumps at the highest level?
I mean, we have to start from the bottom. We actually right now, we have to take advantage of the FIFA windows because we usually don't take advantage of that. So we don't have international games until like, I don't know, 2 months before the World Cup, maybe. Of course, we have to qualify first. And maybe that right now that we lost the bid, we can hope to host the Copa America. That will be great for us. It's a year before that is the qualification tournament to the World Cup. So that will be really good to have our people here playing. But for me, it will be the FIFA windows, because right now, fortunately, there are a lot of players playing overseas, in Spain, in France, in Italy. So we have to take advantage of that. So we get together, because since last year, I think it was August, the Pan Am Games that we won, we haven't been together. So we need that to keep learning from each other, to keep pushing us. And we have to, as Raleigh says, to have the marketing, the television, the magazines. We have to have these continued operations, these continuing games, so everyone can know the people, can know the players, can know what is going on with women's soccer. And we cannot do that if we just get together every I don't know, 2 years, every tournament. So because the interest that we generate in one tournament is going to be lost in the next, I don't know, 1 month, maybe 2 months at the most. So we have to have that continuous preparation to achieve that winner World Cup.
KK, we talked with Ali a little bit about how New Zealand issued in 2018 their equity and equality between their men's and women's team. And in November of 2019, Australia announced the same pay and equal split of commercial revenue between the men's and the women's team. Have you arrived in Australia? How are things playing out in Australia? Is this the end, or is there still work that needs to be done with regards to this equality in the men's and the women's side of the federation?
Yeah, we achieved a massive milestone in November last year. It wasn't overnight that it happened. Steps occurred over a period of probably 3-4 years to arrive at that. But it basically shows that our federation recognized that we deserve to be treated equally like the men. And it took a lot of work and a lot of time to arrive at that. But basically, it's not just about being paid equally, it's about having the equal opportunity. So we now receive all of the same facilities that the men have access to. It's the same quality hotels, same training facilities, same standard of travel class, same number of staff, which can be quite ridiculous. I remember the first time going into camp in the new year after the new CBA and looking around going, oh my God, I've never seen this many staff around the team in my life. They definitely outnumbered the players, that's for sure. But these are the things that we're now entitled to, and they're hoping to increase our performance by doing so. So I think it's definitely not over, especially in these tough times of COVID, because obviously it's a massive cost on the federation to now have 2 teams that are at this extreme running cost. And in a tough time such as COVID, like how is it going to look? To the present day, the Federation has been extremely supportive and they've honoured the CBA. But in the next coming months and coming year, I mean, who knows what it will look like. Every organisation has been under extreme pressure, and so far our Federation in Australia has been extremely supportive and kept their word and supported the females, and I hope that continues.
So you said it took 3-4 years, and it was a slow process to get to that decision in November 2019. What was going on in those 3 years? I mean, because it's 3 years until the World Cup, so like, let's get started, right? I mean, what lessons did we learn from that? What happened during that window?
Collective bargaining agreements go for a number of years. So in 2015 was the turning point for us. We were in a poor position financially as female athletes. A number of us just financially couldn't keep playing, and we just turned around to Federation and said, we're not doing it anymore. We went on strike, and at that moment they stood up and took notice of us, and we came to an agreement and had improved conditions, and then that filtered down to working on a domestic league CBA. So then our W League suddenly had improved conditions, so certain medical standards, always having a physio at training, playing field conditions, etc., etc. So it filtered down to the W League level, and then we could move on to the next CBA for the national teams, and it just kind of increased gradually in that way.
Got it.
Can I ask what was the men's national team at all involved, and did they support the fight to help you guys?
Definitely. So the new CBA is now collective. That's a key difference. So obviously we couldn't have bargained for this new CBA last year without a full support and the backing of the men, and they were fully behind it, which is it's great. It's very honourable of them, and they understand that we do the same work. We're elite athletes just as they are. They saw how poor our conditions were, and they're extremely supportive of it and very vocal about it, which helps push the Federation to change things as well.
I think that's a good point and a great question, Allie, because this isn't a women's football issue, right? This is a football issue, and men are not only welcomed but needed in this movement. So I think it's an important piece, an important call to action to all the male footballers out there and supporters of the Men's World Cup, that they're needed in this movement as well.
Yeah, I feel like it's a kind of cost-free, not solution, but like it would help so much if more men's players were more vocal about gender equality and about, improved conditions. And sometimes I don't know if it's, a lack of awareness or what we can do, but I've noticed in the bid, obviously some very high profile athletes, particularly male football players from Australia were, definitely involved, and it just gives such a boost. And I've played at a couple clubs where, just a Instagram story where a men's player is saying, that the women have a game over the weekend, but it's such a weird, in my mind, you don't want to feel like that, the damsel in distress, that we need the men. But in this case, I feel like it's a kind of legitimate and it's not something to be ashamed of, that the fact that we could really, really use them and their voices and their platforms to just, and again, I really hope that after they get their great Men's World Cup, that there's a lot of excitement, and that could be an area where we could really ask for that help in terms of getting people excited about the Women's World Cup.
I think too, I just want to add, what I think is so cool about, an organization like FIFPRO is now we also have more access to information. So now we know what's going on in other countries. We know how we can structure our own contracts. We're not starting from scratch anymore, we can learn from each other. And I think too, it really comes down to just we've been playing the game for a long time. We know what we need. We know what to expect. Obviously there's sports science and there's so many other things, but it's also about sitting down with our federation and and planning, like not just thinking about this year, but planning the next 4 years. And I think that's like, you know, I know as Canadians, that's what we learned from the Australian Federation. You know, it was about, you know, action plans for not just right now, but the next 4 years and how that looks. So I think having federations that are willing to sit down with their players and think of like, how can we be successful? And it's not always about funding. You know, like I know it's always like, oh, this and this, but you have the ability to be creative, like as long as you're working together. And of course, obviously the men's support, I mean, they have the money and the power still in the game. That's the reality. So without them, you know, we can scream and ask for more, but we need their support.
Yeah. I mean, everybody has their platform, and some people's megaphones are bigger than others, and we all need to use the megaphones that we have. You know, I'm thinking right now, and KK, you talked about COVID-19 and coronavirus and this world that we're living in right now, which just feels like a crazy time. And there's certainly some challenges that have come along with it. But I guess in trying to look positively, one of the things that we do have is we have this pause, right? And not as much football is being played right now. So we do have the time to hopefully reflect and maybe even talk to our federations and think about what the plans should be for the next 3-4 years in this next cycle until the World Cup. So what do you think this time of reflection can do for us? And Natalia, I'll throw this to you because I haven't heard from you in a minute, but what do you think we can do during this time to reflect and come out of this pandemic stronger and moving the game forward for women's football?
Yeah, I was going to say that, I mean, talking about all these planning, that, for example, for the league here in Colombia, the last 2 years, it was a 2-3 months at the most league. And right now, because of COVID and everything, there is no league for this year. And I think it's a really good opportunity because we can focus on next year. We are like 6 months from now to the 2021, and we have to take advantage of that because we can plan from the next year until the World Cup, and to have these little breakdowns, maybe a plan for 10 years, but breaking down in little groups of 3, maybe something like that. And I really think we need that planning, that development in order to achieve where we want to be. Because right now, I mean, as I told you guys before, we are starting from the bottom. So everything that we can achieve from now on to the 2023 is going to be a huge success for us. So I always say in the interview that we need this plan in order to know where we want to be, because we are just kind of reacting every year to the circumstances or the reality of the people, and we are not maybe thinking ahead of ourselves. We are just reacting to everything that is going on, and that gives no time to do it in the best way. So because everything is so quickly, so it's just, okay, we need a league, so we are going to have a league of 2 months, and maybe just forget for the next year about it. And if we have this plan, we really can focus on where we want to be.
Erin talked about FIFPRO bringing us together and being a platform where athletes from different countries and different clubs can communicate and we can learn from each other. So my question to each of you is, what do you feel like has been one lesson or 2, whatever, however many lessons, but a key lesson that you've learned in your experience with your country or your federation or your professional footballing situation that we can learn from and we can start to talk about? So maybe a woman from France or Afghanistan or South Africa could be watching this and saying, hey, this is one thing that maybe I can take to my federation and do in my country. KK, what do you think?
As I've got older in the game, I think I've realized I think the game's kind of crept up on us and surprised us in a way. So a lot of people that are within the game don't have well thought out strategies. So if you're within a club, if you're within an organization and you're working within the female game, do they have a 5-10 year strategy, like Natalia was saying? And it's actually pretty astounding and surprising how little clubs and organizations do. So I wouldn't be afraid to ask tough questions and ask big questions, and to really, you know, put it to them and ask them, like, where do you think the game is going within your circle? Because I mean, I think it crept up on me as well as a younger player. I didn't think that the game would be where it is now, that's for sure. And you often don't think these things in your early 20s, but as you get older, you're wondering, like, how are we going to get from A to B? Like, has anyone thought about this? Like, we know where we want to be, but how are we actually going to get there? So I think there's a lack of big thinking, and I think if we can have more intelligent people working in that space, it'll help grow the game faster.
Yeah, asking the tough questions. I think that's a great lesson. Allie, what do you think is a lesson that you've learned that other people can apply?
I think when this push to grow the women's game started happening, we were really focused on salaries. And that's something I definitely, you want to go to a club that's going to pay you a higher salary. And there aren't that many clubs in the women's game, for everyone to go to a club that can pay you a huge salary. But I think in the last few years, I've realized that, because now I kind of, like KK, you kind of have a shift in perspective, and you try to think, how can we leave this game in a better place for the next generations? And it's not always going to be about money. And I start thinking, what can clubs do or federations do that isn't just to pay the players more? Because sometimes that actually isn't an option. And I think having, a physio at every training, having a good physio, an experienced physio, having access to mental health resources, a sports psychologist. I think there are other ways around like to help and improve the game when we talk about working conditions. So the focus can't and maybe shouldn't always be on just salaries. There are other ways that we need and that we can improve the conditions for women's players. And I think those are big, and it will end up being money in the long run, because if you don't have access to good healthcare, if you don't have a physio, if you don't feel mentally healthy, your career will be cut short anyway. So it actually is worth more money, some of these other areas. So I think that's something that I've really realized, and kind of if I were to consult with clubs or federations when they say, well, we can't pay players more, but there are other ways that it's still going to cost money, but I mean, it will really, really be beneficial without just saying, oh, now we can pay every player, X times more.
Great. Awesome. So salaries are important, but all those other conditions are really, really key to having women's footballers be able to play at the highest level.
Yeah.
Love it. Erin, what about you? What's a lesson that you feel like you've learned in your career in Canada?
Well, I think, I'm like extremely proud of that 2012 team when we brought home the bronze medal. And what I think is so cool about that group of women, and I encourage this in countries around the world, is so many of that team have stayed in football. They've become coaches. They're helping grow leagues in Canada. They're giving back to the game. They're getting their UEFA coaching licenses. And I think, the one thing that I've really learned is, like, even when we retire, and we work so hard as players to fight for these rights, we're so qualified and we're so capable of continuing these legacies, even when we're done playing. Like, look at the NWSL right now. There's not one female coach, head coach in the league. And, I can't speak to all the leagues around the world, but I think that's the next big step. Like a couple of years ago, FIFA finally put together something to help push the quality of the refereeing on the women's side of the game. And you have seen a significant improvement on that side. And again, like back to what Natalia was saying, it's about planning for the future. But we have these like capable women who understand how much you have to put into the game, what standards are, like even surfaces, like everything. And we need to keep those women in the game.
Agreed. Agreed. Not only in coaching and refereeing, but I would argue in, in the administrator's suite and sitting around the table, making the decisions about monies and salaries as well. So we have to figure out that pipeline.
Absolutely. There's so many board members and there's so many people that are having input on our women's teams that don't know that much about football. You know what I mean? So I think it's important that we get our women in there making decisions.
Yeah. One day there will be a president of FIFA that is a woman. One day. I'm hoping.
Well, I also want to just give a shout out too, which is why I think this will be a really great example. Having the World Cup in Australia and New Zealand is we have the president of our federation is a woman and our prime minister is a woman. So I'm like,
Yeah, go ahead. Natalia, what about you? What's a lesson that you've learned in Colombia along the way that we can learn from?
For me, it will be communication. I think positive communication, not only within the team, within the national team, or with the national team and the federation, but with the press and the message that we want to give. Because right now, there are a lot of girls that are saying, yeah, I want to be like Natalia, like Daniela, like all these great players, and not only saying, I want to be like Falcao or James. So I think we are making a huge impact in our country, but I also think that the communication and the message that we want to give the girls is very important in order to maybe to change that mindset that we were talking about before, and giving this positive image of women's soccer in Colombia, because there are still some people that think that we cannot play, that women cannot play, that there is unfortunately no money in the business, there is no attractiveness. So we need to change that, and the way we communicate with the press, with the federation, with other players, with the little girls, with everyone is really important in order to give this positive message and to have this image to be example for the girls, and not only for the girls but also for the boys, that say, yeah, this is a great example for us to follow.
Yeah, I think it's so important for little girls and little boys and everybody to be able to see it, and then it makes it just so much more possible to achieve. So I think you're right, Natalia, that communication is huge. So we're getting close to the end of our time. I have one last question for each of you. How do we make 2023 in Australia and New Zealand the biggest and best tournament that the world has ever seen? Not the best soccer tournament, not the best women, or not the best women's World Cup tournament, the biggest and the best tournament that the world has ever seen. What needs to happen between now and then? Allie, start with you. Put you on the spot, girlfriend.
I think I kind of answered that earlier. I think all the sponsors, anyone involved in the buildup and creating an awesome men's World Cup should have that same mindset going into the women's World Cup. And I think as the host countries, you could see the amazing effort that went into the marketing and presenting this bid, and that kind of excitement, getting people on board, that kind of engagement that must continue, because we don't want to have, talk the talk and say all this and then empty stands, So I think it's important. We have a responsibility as the players from these host countries and our federations, and for us to push our federations to make sure that the communication is there. What do we want to see? What do we want the players to experience when they come into our home nations? And I think there are a lot, as players from the previous tournaments, we had that experience in terms of what the hotel experience was like, security, engagement with fans, fan zones, our families and friends who traveled to France, to Canada to go to these tournaments. What was their experience like? And then we need to have that direct communication with our federations. But I'm pretty confident that they're going to put on a good show. So I would like the call to action to be a little bit more to any sponsors and companies to really show that they support gender equality, that they support the women's game, that they support women's sport, that they support women in general by getting involved in this tournament.
I love it. I'm just going to go around the circle. Erin, what do you think about how we can make this tournament the best ever?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm obsessed with the Olympics and I love the Olympics, but the only people that can go and see the Olympic Games are like an elite few because it's become a really expensive thing to go to. And I think what I loved about what they did in France is they made the ticket sales like affordable for families to go. And I think the one thing is just making the next World Cup accessible to as many people around the world, because the women's game is so freaking good now that it's just about getting more people seeing it. And I think for me, if they can get as many people watching as possible, I think that'll really make it a successful World Cup.
Great. KK, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to echo that. So in France, I got driven mental. Like I was participating in the World Cup and I could not watch the tournament. So for me, obviously broadcasting is something we're not going to fully understand and there's a lot of money in it, but how do we get it on TV for people to actually watch? Because we're blocking people out. Like we're not at that point yet. Let's open it up. Let's allow people to enjoy and experience it as much as they can. Let's not lock people out. I mean, I thought it was just quite crazy that I was having a battle just to get access to the games. I think there's two ways to answer the question. One is from the athlete perspective and one is from the community. So from a footballer's perspective, the next 3 years, how much can we grow the game to be more technical and faster? So can we improve the club standard? So we have players competing and playing every single day in a great environment with great facilities, with other great players consistently. And then when they're at the World Cup, how do they maximize their performance? So Ali touched on some of the hotels weren't up to standard in France. So how do we ensure that we have class hotels in Australia and New Zealand? How do we get single rooms? I think this is something that could improve everyone's experience too. How do you have a choice not to have a roommate? I mean, some of us are over 30 and we have to room with someone for 4 to 6 weeks. So little things like this, can immensely improve the World Cup. Chartered flights are another example. I don't know if anyone's been to Australia, but it's massive. So if you're expected to get on a commercial flight, you're probably not going to be happy about it. So all of these little things, how do we ensure they happen? And then from the community perspective, how do we make it the best experience ever? So how do we have full engagement from the community? I don't have the answer to that, but I think Australia and New Zealand are collectively going to give it a good try. You've seen some of their marketing campaigns already, but to have, full engagement from everyone in Australia, maxed out crowds, people in town. So when a team comes to a town, that's what I loved about 2011 in Germany. When you rock up to a town as a team, they'd welcome you. They'd be like, oh my God, we're hosting a team. This is amazing. You'd get the whole community and the whole town out there. I didn't have that experience in Canada and France, but how do we maybe get something like that happening at the next World Cup where you feel that extra sense of worth, you feel important within the tournament. So yeah, there's a lot to be done.
In 1994, the Men's World Cup was hosted in the United States and Brazil was the team that was training in my town. And that's when I fell in love with soccer. I fell in love with the game because they were there and I got to see them and live it and breathe it. And I fell in love even more. And so I think you're right. If you can get that community connection, I think we'll continue to build fans for life. Natalia, finally to you, what do you think is needed to make 2023 the best World Cup tournament ever?
I think everything has been said right so far to make the World Cup the best of all time. But I think we just have to start talking about it from now on, from today, and don't allow the speech to die and just wait until I don't know, 3-4 months before the World Cup. We just have to investigate and to talk about what is going on in New Zealand, in Australia, but also in Canada, in Colombia, in Europe, in Africa, in all these countries about women's soccer. We just can't allow to people stop talking about women's soccer. We just have to continue doing so in our countries and every place in the world.
I think you're absolutely right. I think communication is a huge piece, and I know I will vow to do my part to keep spreading the good word, and to continue to make sure that we use our platforms and our megaphones as loud as possible to keep this game moving forward. So to just kind of wrap things up, I want to first thank FIFPRO, its members, and all the players that FIFPRO represents. If anyone out there wants to learn a little bit more about FIFPRO, you can go to their website, fifpro.org, FIFPRO.org. There's a contact form on there that you can fill out to reach out. You can also reach out to your local union if you'd like, or follow them on social media. On Twitter at FIFPRO, and on Instagram, their handle is at FIFPRO_official. And lastly, to you wonderful, lovely ladies, our 4 panelists, our athletes, our footballers, our activists, our badasses. Thank you guys so much for taking the time. I feel like I learned a lot. I feel like we're starting this conversation that we need to continue over the course of the next 3 years. So good luck the next time you're back on the pitch, whenever that is, wherever that is. And I cannot wait to see you in person in 2023 in Australia and New Zealand. Thank you guys very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank
Thanks to all of
you.
our viewers
Thanks,
as well.
guys.
Have a great rest of your day, and goodbye for now.